Welcome to Super Saturday, where we kick off our training shoes and have great monuments built in our honour. One which I envisioned a little to the left. I'm Shifu Payne, and last year we took a gander at what is widely considered to be the last great dynasty of ancient Egypt. One that, after several ups and downs, created one of the most well-known monarchs in history with Cleopatra. But also, towards the beginning, represented a utopia. A coming together of two great civilizations. One which aimed to benefit the collective population as a whole. But as we'll move on to Ptolemy's 4 through 8, we'll begin to see not only the cracks begin to show, but also how those cracks became real weaknesses. What do I mean by that? Let's find out. First, let's settle back in by establishing where we left Egypt in our last video. The economy was booming due to trade and commerce. The installation of the Library of Alexandria gave rise to a community of scholars and free thinkers who had free rein to learn and debate at their leisure. More and more immigrants from Greece came to Egypt, which unfortunately placed more and more of an emphasis on Greek communities than the native Egyptian. Even though the Ptolemies bore the title of pharaoh, parades touting Greek gods, including Alexander the "oh hey, he's a god now," and the general ignorance of Egyptian culture, left a sour taste in the mouth of a respective Egyptian citizen. New economic policies, including the conversion of any free land into farming and wheat fields, intermediaries being used to collect revenue, plus any excuse to increase taxes for the humble native Egyptian, left much to be desired. You see, tax hikes never work. Just ask King John, or Charles I, or Boris Johnson. All of which came to a crescendo when, in 217 BCE, Ptolemy IV recruited native Egyptians to fight the Battle of Raphia as part of the Second Syrian War, which broke away from the convention of using Greek soldiers. Ptolemy stood, addressing his troops before the Battle of Raphia, fully in pharaoh attire and all the trimmings of a true ruler of Egypt. But with a translator present, as Ptolemy did not speak Egyptian. The sentiment among Egyptians was clear. They were fighting as the arrow fodder of someone who did not even respect their language. This is what happens when you miss your Duolingo lesson. And so, when the battle was over and over 20,000 trained and armed Egyptians saw an opportunity, they took it. As looting and anarchy became the new norm, civilians became bandits and roamers throughout the Delta, raiding and pillaging the Greek garrison and Egyptian temples, both symbols of tyranny. Despite the offer of aid from the Macedonian and Seleucid kings, Lower Egypt in the north, it's confusing, I know, became a site of civil war in only a few short years. Meanwhile, further south in Thebes, tensions were also growing as a result of being so far from Alexandria, where Ptolemy IV spent most, if not all, of his time. Clearly, the needs of Upper Egypt were not a priority. Sensing the growing tension, Ptolemy IV had a Temple of Horus commissioned in Geba, but this did not help in the slightest. The authority of this invasive and not native pharaoh became weaker and weaker, to the point where many cried for a change of power, with a leader that was Egyptian by blood. A cry which was answered in the form of Horwenefer, who became officially recognized as pharaoh by the priesthood of Amun in 205, and began his reign by abolishing the hated tax regimes, forcing Greeks from their homes, and destroying land records. Upper and Lower Egypt were under the control of two pharaohs, making the people who lived in the border understandably confused. But when Ptolemy V came to power in 200 BCE at the age of 4, a counter-offensive was launched, recapturing cities as they pressed on to Thebes. Things went from bad to worse when Horwenefer passed away in 199 BCE, but his successor Ankh-Wenefer had a plan. They would target Sauti, a province 190 miles away from the recaptured Thebes, which supplied the rural economy for Thebes, cutting Thebes and the troops occupying it from supplies and communication from Alexandria, a gambit which paid off, as Ptolemaic forces abandoned Thebes, allowing Ankh-Wenefer to take it back. Finally sick of this shit, Ptolemy V made a plan to attack the Delta rebel headquarters directly, overpowering the rebels with their well-funded firepower. Finally, the rebels of the Delta were brought to Memphis and executed in 196 BCE during the coronation of Ptolemy V, an event which was commemorated in 3 written dialects: hieroglyphics, Greek, and Demotic, on what is now known to us as the Rosetta Stone. Once this was over, the next step was to get rid of this people's pharaoh and bring back the wheat and tax profits. Instead of, listening to the voices of the collective native population and maybe working to strengthen the population as a whole. I mean, it's not like civil wars have ever led to problems on the international level, right? Forces of Ankh-Khnefra were driven from Sauti before Ankh-Khnefra himself was driven from Thebes himself. In 191 BCE, driven to the Nubian border, Thebes was back in control of the Ptolemies. Land was auctioned off, taxes were back on, and all that was left was to capture Ankh-Khnefra himself. Despite help from Nubian forces, the would-be pharaoh was captured in 186, but not killed, as it would have made a martyr out of the rebel leader. With this came more military presence in Upper Egypt, lavish spending on temples including the now completed Djebel temple to Horus, military camps placed in key areas, public torture and execution of rebel members, and all in all just another day in the office. But despite this reclamation, there was still trouble. The discourse of these rebellions, coupled with trouble within the royal family, plus weakened economic standing, left the Ptolemies in dire straits. By Ptolemy V's passing in 180 BCE, Syria, Anatolia, and Thrace were out of their control, and the Hellenistic Mediterranean was crumbling, making a way for big boy Rome to step in. What was a dynasty to do?
Well, I'll tell you, marry their sister!
Ptolemy VI became pharaoh while still in nappies, so his mother acted as regent until she died 4 years later. With Ptolemy VI having not even gone through puberty yet, it was forced by the other members of government to have a tri-rule. That is, 3 siblings working together as joint monarchs. Ptolemy VI, Ptolemy VIII, and their sister, / the wife of Ptolemy VI.
Now, as anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together could tell you, having 3 siblings occupying the throne of one country, yeah, that's not a good idea.
With different priorities, rivalries, and Ptolemy VIII stealing Ptolemy VI's teddy, except not that last one, things were going from bad to worse. When the Seleucids, led by Antiochus, took over Egypt, deposed the Ptolemies, stole their blankie, and that was the end of that.
But not for long!
Because Rome, remember them? You should, they're kind of important, stepped in and sent Antiochus packing, moving in themselves as the new stepdad of Ptolemaic Egypt, having to continually make peace between the siblings until their fighting grew so bad the people had enough and started another rebellion. Yes, in 165 BCE, the revolts of Thebes began again, despite Ptolemy VI's frankly pathetic attempts to ask them nicely to stop, which did not work. And Ptolemy ran to Rome to go into exile. Ptolemy VIII fared no better, acting with such an iron fist that people wanted his brother back.
I know!
But Ptolemy VIII, after attempts on his life, had a plan. He made a will, stipulating that if he died with no heir, Egypt would fall under the control of Rome, which made everyone pack it in very quickly, as an Egypt controlled by a foreign king was one thing, but under the thumb of an expanding empire, clearly too far. Ptolemy VI died in 165, making Ptolemy VIII the official ruler of Egypt, with stepdad Rome by his side. Unfortunately, Ptolemy in the process gave away more Egyptian independence by handing more responsibilities to Rome, signing the death sentence of Egypt right before the eyes of history. I mean, speaking as someone who's had to live through several historical events in the past few years, not a good sign, buddy. Having secured his position, married his sister, had a kid, Ptolemy VIII began to get the people of Egypt on his side, by bribery in the case of the priesthoods, or in the case of fear, and then in 140 married his sister's daughter.
So his niece/daughter.
Causing mother and daughter to become rivals.
And, again, disgusting.
Civil war then broke out between the two, and Ptolemy VIII fled to Cyprus with his daughter/niece/wife. But, fearing that his son by his sister/wife would be pronounced pharaoh in his absence, had his son killed, and the pieces sent back to his mother. Despite this clear atrocity, the people were still on Ptolemy's side, and supported him in the reclaiming of his kingdom, especially after promising native Egyptians offices in government, something not done for 2 centuries. The jewel of his nation, Alexandria, was recaptured, and the people swam in the decadence of their country, becoming more and more like their monarch by the day. Once back in power, Ptolemy had his opponents trapped and burned alive. Such ruthless action, while sending a message to any other would-be opposers, only accelerated the Ptolemaic decline. Come 116 BCE, Ptolemy VIII passed, leaving 2 sons behind him, a tattered reputation, a people based in fear and duplicity, and an enemy invited in. For at the same time of Ptolemy VIII's passing, a group of Romans visited Philae and the temple to Isis, and left an inscription of their names in Latin on the temple walls, a sign of the future. It was the beginning of the end for the last great dynasty of Egypt.
So there we have it, and after looking at all of this and considering where we are, it really does seem that Ptolemaic Egypt really did sign its own death sentence. I mean, ignoring the needs of its people, allowing an encroaching empire to gain more independence and control of a country, and taking actions which, while cathartic over time, only exasperated the already existing issues. And when you consider how Ptolemy I started all of this, as a utopia, as a hopeful bastion of knowledge and of two great civilizations coming together, sharing knowledge and creating a haven for scholars, while also honouring the culture that already existed. And when you just see how their descendants just mucked it all up and just took for granted what they had handed to them. Yeah, it kind of makes you want to see everything collapse, doesn't it? But I guess all of that will just have to wait until next time. Thank you for watching this week's video, and in the comments let me know what your take on all of this is and what you think the greatest fatal flaw was in Ptolemaic Egypt. Where did it all go wrong? What was the thing which truly broke the camel's back? Or was the straw that broke the camel's back, or something like that? But with that, thank you all for watching, and until next time everyone, peace be with you.